Hey, everybody out there, and thanks for joining us for today's Search Engine Journal webinar. If you don't know me, I'm Heather Campbell. I'm the VP of Marketing and Sales here. And with me, I have Jeff Hirz, EVP of Business Development at OuterBox. Jeff, how are you doing today? And welcome to your SEJ webinar.
Thank you so much, Heather. Happy to be here.
Awesome. So first, before we get started, everybody use the chat. Let us know where you're coming in from. I am based out of West Virginia. Jeff, where are you based out of?
Cleveland, Ohio.
Cleveland, Ohio, so not too far from me, actually. So today we are here to talk about marketing and growth priorities. OuterBox has put together a survey of 1,000 of their best clients and businesses, and they're bringing the data to the table today to show you where they're having success and where you may need to pivot your strategy. So with that, let me get into some quick housekeeping, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jeff to get the fun stuff started. So if you need closed captioning, it's the little CC in the top right of your screen. Give that a click. We are going to do Q&A at the end of the presentation. So if you have questions for Jeff relevant to the materials and things that you're curious about, add those to the Q&A tab. If you see a question that you like, give it a little thumbs up, and that'll tell us it's more important. And then we do our best to front load those when we get to that section. Before you leave today's call, we're going to throw a quick survey at you. It just lets us know how today's webinar went, and then it gives you an opportunity to suggest any other topics that you'd like to see us bring to the table. You'll receive today's recording and the slides in your inbox once it's done buffering, so watch for that. I think we've got a handout of the actual report for you all. If not, that'll be in your follow-up email. We got some little emojis at the bottom, show Jeff some love, but don't get too excited and spam them because we have actually had to turn them off before. So show us your excitement, but not too much excitement. And with that, I'm going to get out of here. Jeff, they're all yours. I'll be back at the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Heather. Well, everybody, thank you for joining us. This is really wanted to present findings from a survey we do. We do an annual, what we call Market Pulse survey here at OuterBox. We have north of 1,000 clients, and so that gives us quite a bench to draw from and gives us a really solid opportunity to garner first-party data. And we figured that would be a bit of a waste if we were not able to understand certain conditions within the market, how business units are performing across the country, across the world. We have clients all over, primarily U.S. based, but all over the country, all over the world as well. And this is just a great opportunity for us to provide insights, both as kind of nice to knows, but then also actionable takeaways. So without further ado, a little personal context on me. So I've been in the digital space about 20 years, almost a decade here at OuterBox. And I've, really the decade here, I've had a front row seat to how businesses adapt to economic cycles, right? Been here through COVID, been here through the revival, been here through really 1,000% headcount growth, revenue growth from 2017 on. I do lead a team of nearly 20. So there's really the challenges we see across our entire client base there's a lot of transparency in terms of how we service that within the marketing department. So, and a little personal context too, proud dad, 3 girls, full-on girl dad, love every second of it. And then a little bit about OuterBox for those who are unfamiliar. So we are a full-service digital agency. We were founded 22 years ago. Specializations in SEO and geo, that makes up more than half of our business. But we also have specializations in paid media, UX, email, agentic AI, and that is not just buzzword chasing. That is a dedicated practice we here have at OuterBox with full-time folks dedicated to agentic AI development, both to improve internal workflows, which we will talk about a lot today, but then also client-facing services like web assistance and agentic development. So pretty full suite for the most part, but gives us nice visibility into all marketing channels across a wide variety of clients. Really what we want to do today, we're going to start with the methodology of the survey. How did we position this survey? What questions did we ask? And what is the makeup of the client base that we surveyed? What do they look like? How does it apply to you and your company? We'll look at the performance trends. We're going to look at, take a step back and look at the broader macroeconomic environment as well. That's something that really we find one of the main reasons we survey our client base is to understand how our macroeconomic conditions impacting our clients, So both we can help pivot our service offerings and our team to service them better, but then also just helps us inform across our entire client base. So we know that certain things that happen in industrial manufacturing, well, that client base really serves as the bellwether for any economic trends that come through. And then how does that play out on the e-commerce side, on the retail side, healthcare, right? So it gives us really good context into the overall economic condition as well as the makeup of our client base. And then really look at how does that inform 2026 priorities, right? So 2025 performance informing the future, informing what we're going to do. We'll talk about really how this survey helped us focus a lot of our initiatives for 2026 as a company at OuterBox, and then also just candid feedback on how our clients are repositioning themselves. The market has changed a lot in the past 2 years. There's been a lot of downward pricing pressure, a lot of headwinds, if you will, that people have had to get pretty creative in terms of how they solve for. But all in all, some really good findings across the entire client base to present what we'll call an action framework at the end. Steps to take to act upon these trends that we're seeing, and then capitalize on 2026 performance. All right, so methodology matters. So we did survey our 1,000 client base. We're going to be very transparent about our approach, its limitations, but really in terms of who makes up that client base, right? We do have B2B and B2C clients all across a wide variety of industries, and there's dozens of industries represented in this survey. Full transparency, 76% of the respondents are in the B2B space with heavy concentration in industrial. Now, as I mentioned before, we didn't mind this or felt like it skewed data too much because industrial really does serve as like I said, the bellwether to the rest of the economy to a large part. Like you get, if your cars become more expensive, your microwaves become more expensive, any output, anything you consume at the store, well, that started where, that was manufactured somewhere, that was made somewhere, right? So how interest rates affect industrial, how tariffs affect industrial, how raw minerals, resources affect industrial, that all dovetails into the broader economy. So this is a really good indicator of broader context, how everything went in 25, of course, but then what to expect in 26. Here's a list of the survey questions that we're going to talk about today. We did ask more questions than what you'll see in here, but the reality is that we wanted to focus on past performance. As you can see, the first half of these focused on 2025 performance. You can kind of measure yourself, gauge yourself against, was this your experience in 25? Was it somehow different? And it may be different, but I will say if it is different, if you're not in the industrial space, a lot of what they felt in 25, you're going to feel in 26, right? So highly relevant there. And then looking forward, right? How does this map out to 2026? What does this look like? How can you adapt? How can you pivot based on what all of our respondents are really saying in terms of what they're expecting the year to look like? So before we dive into survey results, I do want to understand the environment that businesses are operating in general, right? So we have overall, there's measured business optimism, right? I think going into 25, as we'll talk about here in a second, there was a lot more trepidation going into 2025. This time around, there's a lot more cautious optimism. And yes, Stefan, most of the results are based in the U.S. So this is primarily a U.S. client base. So measured business optimism, we have a bit of a collapse in consumer confidence. This is kind of a big one, but this has actually been consistent for the past few years. So this hasn't gone up and down too much. Buyers have been cautious now for a few years as there's been downward pricing pressures, as inflation reached record highs a few years ago. We understand that's leveled off a little bit, but still one of the top concerns with our client base. Manufacturing, to our point, has had a rebound in the past year or so with a lot of the reshoring efforts that the new administration has brought to the table. This has absolutely helped a lot of what we'll call it's the PMI index, where it is whenever it gets north of 50, that typically is a good sign that there's increased purchases, increased POs coming through to then fund future growth. Now, I will say what we have seen, and kind of a caveat to this, is that there are folks that are kind of doing this, what we're calling buying ahead behavior, in fear of increased tariffs. Just because of the volatility that we did see with the tariff environment in 2025, there's still some of that hesitation. But given rates where they're at today, there's a lot of folks who are, buying before potentially those rates go up again. And then just in terms of how supply chains have been reshaped, this was, a pretty significant shift last year that we're seeing like I said, dovetail into 2026. But it's created a bit of a new normal. And I don't like using that term because that's a COVID era term, but we are seeing that economically, that there is a bit of a new normal where it's just sustained pressure, right? And that will be a theme throughout the survey, our findings, and our insights. The sustained pressure is not going away, right? So how do you adapt? How do you get creative? How do you pivot? How do you become more efficient with your team, with your budget, with everything you have at your disposal? But ultimately, what we found is a very interesting finding, especially from that JP Morgan stat, is that there's more optimism that business leaders have in their own company than they have in the broader economy, right? So now what that tells us is that it comes down to how do you differentiating yourself, and that comes down to your execution quality, your efficiency, right? General market trends, everybody going into 25 with a lot of trepidation around tariffs. 2025 outperformed for most folks, as we'll see. They either met or exceeded expectations, which we'll get to here in a minute. But so really now, as we've kind of adapted to this new environment, it all comes down to being much more intentional and surgical with the efforts you are putting into play. All right, so survey results, the moment you've all been waiting for. So first question we asked was, how would you classify business performance in 2025? As you can see, we had 31% met expectations, 25 exceeded, and 13 far exceeded. Now, this was the OuterBox client base, so maybe we can take a little bit of credit for that. But the reality is, overall, I think people went into 2025 pretty nervous, right? So the fact that I think expectations may have ultimately been a little low, to be honest, because there was so much nervousness going into that new year with the new administration. But ultimately, it does seem to have outperformed most folks in what they expected. Now, big thing here is this doesn't mean that was easy, right? I think that's the big thing here. This is not just feeding the sales pipeline. This is not just new business coming in the door. This is something there's a bit of scratching and clawing, if you will. So how it compares to in the macro environment, right? So this will be as we go through all these question slides, this is going to be the general makeup. We'll kind of analyze the OuterBox client respondent base, and then how it compares to the broader economic trend. Now, I will say for the most part, it matches up almost every time, which I thought was somewhat interesting. When you look at how it compares to the broader market, 56% of companies met revenue projections nationally, right? So a little less than the OuterBox client base, but overall, generally positive performance. A lot of downward pricing pressures, as I said, with 40% finding that growth very or extremely challenging, right? So this is not coming easy. This is very much people being scrappy, and none of this is really explosive growth either, as you'll see as we get further on. These are incremental gains, right? So people growing 5%, 10%, maybe marginally better than that. But ultimately, what's holding a lot of folks back that we found was labor, hiring, bodies, right? So that was one of the top concerns in the macro environment, was that 21% of small businesses cited labor quality and turnover. We have, I think it was something like more than 30% on the macro level, more than 30% of companies reported having open positions. Historically, that is 25%, 26%. So definitely above where we like to see it, but there are reasons for that, which we'll talk about. So then we wanted to dive in, okay, and there's a lot on the slide, and we'll parse these two charts here separately. If it met expectations, what were those contributing factors? And if it didn't meet those expectations, what were the contributing factors? Now, this was an interesting one because we found flips from our survey from 25 compared to the survey we ran this year. So we'll diagnose that here in a second. So if businesses did not meet expectations, what were those contributing factors? 39% listed economic conditions as the number one reason. Last year, when we did the same survey, 86% of clients blamed the economy for not meeting expectations in 2024. So a big drop off there. Now, I will say that is not, as we kind of further analyze this, finding that we had is this is not necessarily indicative of an improving economy, right? The economy still feels a little shaky, still, as much as GDP is growing and we have, record trade deficits, however you want to, position that. The reality is that it's still somewhat static, right? There's not this massive explosion of growth. So essentially, it's just more like an evolution of how we're thinking about business and responding to outward economic pressures, right? So we're reacting to economic volatility before. Now business leaders are learning to operate within it. So how it compares to the broader market, like I said, this is kind of what we're talking about is going to be the new normal, right? Unfortunately. So there's going to, when I first started at OuterBox almost a decade ago, selling SEO, paid media services, you kind of felt like they flew off the shelf, right? Anymore, there's a lot more analysis, understanding, really a lot of folks closer to the decision-making process than there ever have been before. So that just kind of is an interesting finding there. This is just, it's not that you're selling less or you're doing less. It just seems to be a little bit harder than it was before because people are being a lot more selective of where they're putting their money, right? Again, labor quality being the number one issue that is negatively impacting growth. What's interesting within our survey was that the tight labor market was bottom of the barrel for folks listing it as reasons for why they did not meet expectations. So a little bit of parting ways with the norm. Now, if business performance did meet or exceed expectations, what contributed to that? So now this was one of the more interesting charts just because there's a pretty even distribution between these top three, right? So we had increased customer demand, sales and marketing strategy, and operational improvements for those top three. Whereas last year, so really what that's reflective of, before I get into last year, what's that more reflective of is that with that really forced creativity, right, in terms of how you operate your business, how you achieve profitability, you're seeing kind of split focuses, right? It's not just about filling the top of the funnel. It's not just about filling your pipeline, right? It's very much more about what do you do with your current client base? How do you increase operational efficiencies, right? And then how do you increase customer demand? So a lot of competing priorities here that folks are having to really divide and conquer, if you will. Now, last year when we ran the same survey, we had 59% of client respondents say that sales and marketing is what drove performance in 2024. Now, that was above and away the number one answer, right? So 59% last year. I think the next one down was 30-some%. So a big shift in terms of how business leaders are having to respond to this economic environment and how they're forced to reposition themselves. One of the things that was I'm going to call out was the 6% investments in AI and automation. To me, this tells us two things. One, we have lack of adoption still within AI, especially within organizations, not necessarily at the consumer side, which we'll talk about in a second. There's much faster adoption within buyers than there is within organizations, but there's definitely still a lack of adoption. So we're not seeing the impacts on revenue, on margin that we may otherwise expect to see. But then the other thing here is the time to realize business impact on AI initiatives. And this is part of the reason why I think there is slow adoption. As much as AI is this new sexy thing that everybody, talks about all the time and experiments with, the reality is when you implement agents, when you implement, like I'll give the example of chatbots here. Like OuterBox has a web assistant chatbot that we sell to our clients. That's going to have a nice cost savings, let's say for personnel, for resources. You don't have to have a customer service rep sitting in front of a computer answering questions all day, right? Now AI can take care of that and automatically feed answers back to the user. Well, that cost savings isn't necessarily recognized right away because that customer service rep most likely is not being replaced by this chatbot. They are going to then focus their efforts elsewhere within the organization. So the cost savings is going to be somewhat minimal, which I think is a lot of the reason for the lack of adoption. We are expecting that to change drastically over the next 2 to 3 years, not even necessarily in 2026. Everybody thinks it's going to kill SEO and replace the workforce, and you have all these doom and gloom prophets out there saying the same thing. Every single study that comes out that has a statistically significant data set says the opposite. Not the opposite, but it gives it more nuance, right? This is not doom and gloom. Everything's flipping a switch. Everything's changing tomorrow. It absolutely will change drastically how we do business. It will absolutely change drastically how we service our customer base. But that impact, because of the slow adoption within business units, because it does take time to realize margin on these efforts, it's going to be a bit more of a slow roll. So not surprised by that at all. All right, so how does this compare? So what was interesting is the big focus when you look at globally, when you look at the more macro environment, is that most folks are focused on retention, right? And Harvard Business Review came out at the end of 25 with a study around how a 5% increase in retention can increase profits by 25 to 95. Now that's obviously a huge range, but even at the low end, 25% improvement in profits by increased retention is massive, right? Now the Business Review, of course, surveyed a wide variety of clients, so you're going to have a wide range of margins, but good findings there. My mouse is not working, sorry. Okay. So business outlook. So that's 2025. Now, what 2026 going forward? What does the environment look like? Well, what are people expecting? So this is where you had 43% of people say they were cautiously optimistic. 35% are planning for growth, 14% neutral, and then only 3% expecting a slowdown. There was not much change in this year to year between surveys. And the same question we asked about business outlook for 2025, this was almost in line within a percentage point on every single answer. When you look at the broader economic environment, lines up as well. So if you lump cautiously optimistic and planning for growth together, you see that JP Morgan study where 74% of business owners are optimistic about companies' prospects. That lines up almost perfectly, right? So essentially, optimism has not changed much year over year, but we do know that the market has. So again, focus on not necessarily so much optimism, but efficiency. So we'll get to that here in a minute. Biggest concerns for your business in 2026. Top of the list here, as it typically has been the past 3 years, is the market volatility. So we had 45% say that last year, but it was still the number one concern last year was the market volatility and economic uncertainty. Granted, that was more so in the face of tariffs, right? So talent issues did increase. That was a pretty significant, but also lined up with a lot of the macro environments. So we had 41% of clients respond citing hiring and retaining talent as the number two concern. So that was did not have that level of attention this time last year as it does today, which echoes what we're seeing in the macro environment. So how it compares, 31% of business owners citing inflation, again, kind of lining up with market volatility and economic uncertainty. As much as it's slowed down, it is still there, right? But then when you look at the broader market, these kind of flip-flop where you look at labor quality, this labor issue is the number one issue negatively impacting growth. So that concern seemed to resurface over and over again, and it was backed up by a study by Robert Half, where 38% of workers reported that they are planning to switch. They're planning a job hop in the first half of the year. That's a huge shift in personnel, right? You have 38% of folks who are looking to potentially jump ship, move to another role. That, of course, creates a lot of issues within the organization that they have to backfill, replace, retrain, and is a major growth inhibitor. So this is probably going to be one of the larger issues into 2026, as this is backed up by national data. All right, then we looked at biggest operational priorities for 2026. Now, this is one where we had a flip-flop. We had improving operational efficiencies crowned this response, whereas last year's scaling sales and marketing efforts was the number one response. So last year, only 20% of respondents said improving operational efficiencies was a priority. This year, it's 38%. So that is a massive jump, and this is probably the most central theme to our findings. Was that operational efficiencies, leveraging AI to achieve a lot of those. That is really folks' top priority. So a lot of our actions and insights at the back end of this presentation will discuss how to do that. But 42% of business owners focusing globally on increasing efficiency and productivity through use of technology, translate technology to AI and automation. 60% of business owners planning to use excess cash flow to pay down existing debt. So again, just kind of shoring up, like it's protecting the house, right? And rather than focusing on demand gen, on growth, people are focused on shoring up what they have in the hand, like bird in the hand, two in the bush, right? So that was a big focus this year as well. And then more than half of small businesses seeing AI as essential for competitiveness within 3 years. Now, again, I'll go back to the doom and gloom prophets who are saying it's going to replace all of our jobs and everything like tomorrow. I think a guy from Microsoft came out and said by the end of the year, 50 to 80% of white collar workers, and that's just insane because it does not reflect the reality of our situation. It does not reflect what we're seeing in the market. It does not reflect what we're seeing within our client base or within what these national and global surveys are showcasing us. That being said, AI adoption is absolutely a practical necessity, right? It is not something you should just be toying around with anymore. It should be something that you are allocating resources and leaning into. And then, of course, wrapping up the survey here, how prepared did our client base feel in terms of AI adoption automation this year? So only 6% felt like they were prepared to, I would say, an acceptable level, well prepared or highly prepared. 94% of clients felt like they were only moderately or less prepared, which again shows a bit of a lack of adoption. So we can, you can parse this lots of different ways, but this really is the biggest competitive opportunity gap in the data, right? So this is if any of the OuterBox clients are listening to this, this is your reality. This is where your largest opportunity comes to improve internal efficiencies and get an edge on your competition, right? The fact that only 6% of your competitors feel highly or well prepared, that's the largest opportunity right there. All right, so what do we do with this data? What does this mean? We have a lot of information at our fingertips through our survey. How do we act on it? So our strategic philosophy this year is going to be on fewer bets, better execution, right? You still have to try new things, you still have to experiment, of course, but less attention needs to go to that. More attention needs to go to your existing frameworks that need improvements in terms of how efficient they are and how much they can deliver and their margins. So each recommendation we have, we're going to list out some immediate steps that you can implement today and take away. So ideally, you get some, start taking notes. We got some actions for you, depending on kind of where you're leaning into within your business. But ultimately, one of the big themes that we came away with the survey from was capturing intent versus creating demand. Now, there's an asterisk to this, which we'll get into, and there's a little nuance here, right? Because you can't ignore demand, right? But ultimately, what we have to try to do is capture existing intent. Buyers doing 83% of the research before they contact you is a massive shift in the market, whereas 10 years ago, that was closer to 50%, 50 to 55%. So now with LLMs at the fore, where's the first place people are going to do the research? They're going to ChatGPT or they're going to Claude. So now you have a much larger headwind in that sense, where they're not contacting you to do research. They're contacting you once they've made the decision to reach out to you as a potential partner. So growth in this case now depends on being very visible at the moments of intent, right? So this is where you're going to hear SEO themes come up. You're going to hear, how your website performs in terms of how it's structured, how it's laid out. The reality is, if you can identify and optimize for high intent queries by industry or use case first, hopefully most of you have already done this. You'll subscribe to Search Engine Journal, so I assume there's efficacy there. But ideally, you're starting with that landing page that is focused on the high intent query. You're supporting content with an internal link structure. You're building high authority links to that page. You're spreading your wings with multimedia. Ideally, there's some video on there that's also optimized on its own search engine within YouTube that you embed. You have transcripts. You have metadata. And then if you want to really go the extra mile, you have a pre-recorded webinar that supports what you're trying to do on that page, who you're trying to convert that targets that audience. So ultimately, if you can capture that intent with looking at search volume, looking at a lot of the traditional metrics that we have at our disposal, this is the number one thing to do. So instead of chasing demand, capture existing intent, which means SEO is still the foundation of your strategy. Now, it's not the foundation like it used to be. Like, you don't think of it as the foundation in terms of lead gen, in terms of business growth. SEO, as much as it still drives leads, as much as it still is a critical component for demand gen, has become much more about visibility, credibility. It is now your business card, right? It's your call sign. This is how when people go to, they are validating that you are what LLMs are telling you they are, that what referrals are telling you they are, third-party websites. So the website absolutely has to really serve as that. So it still needs to drive leads ideally and drive business, but ultimately it needs to serve as that business card now, which is a bit of an evolution in the face of AI, right? Because now they're using AI for search and for informational queries, and AI overviews have destroyed any informational traffic used to get. Now it's all about commercial and transactional, right? So ultimately, if you can do that, if you can focus on intent, focus on showing up at the right time per the previous recommendation, this is how you do it, right? So within that, you're posting authoritative, impactful content on social channels. I will say it's important to be selective here, right? This is not something where, this is something where less is more, right, at the end of the day. So don't worry about posting every single day. Worry about posting impactfully, maybe 1 to 3 times a week. Encourage reviews on industry sites. Third-party validation has taken center stage in the age of LLMs. Everybody now looks at their Wikipedia entries and their clutch reviews. But this is absolutely a part of the puzzle, right? So encourage reviews on industry sites and review websites where appropriate, and then submit for industry awards, and then heavily promote when you win. So OuterBox won the largest integrated agency award last year, and man, did we pimp that thing. We put that on every single social channel. We blasted in all of our email blasts for that recognition, and helps, again, shore up that third-party validation. Then we come down to UX. So ideally, at this point, you have when you have people in this mindset where business owners are not less focused on volume and more focused on intent, you have a lot more risk aversion. So this is where taking care of your own house before seeking out and going outside of it is critical. So ideally, you have an optimized user experience. Your customer experience has become so much more critical in the face of deprecated organic rankings. Your traffic is everybody on this call, all your traffic, I'm sure, has taken a massive hit from organic search in the face of AI overviews, meaning every single visit you get has suddenly become exponentially more valuable, right? So but within those people who are visiting, there's still that risk aversion, right? They're still trying to validate you. So ideally, you have a progression rate analysis that showcases where your bottlenecks are. And you can get this out of GA. This is very easy information to get. We audit this for our clients all the time. You're looking at things like bounce rate on the homepage, right? That's kind of 101, right? If you have a high bounce rate on the homepage, there's some work to do, right? The front of your business card is not doing what it needs to do. Then you look at progression rate from, we'll say, service page to subpage, or case study, or if you're e-commerce, you're looking at category page to PDP, right? So you look at that progression rate. Where are folks stopping? Meaning, where are you failing to deliver impact? Where are you scaring people off? Right? Sales cycles are longer than ever, whether you're in e-com or whether you're in B2B industrial manufacturing, right? So if you don't have solid UX on the site, you're going to see that in your progression rate, and ultimately you're going to see that in deprecated lead volume or e-com sales. Paid media continues to be as critical as it ever was. However, one finding from this, a takeaway that we have found, is that things like ROAS become that much more critical. We have a lot of clients last year who, if ROAS started to drop below some thresholds, which of course you need to maintain profitability, well, that became that much more critical. So we actually saw a lot of clients dial back spend last year because they're much more focused on margin. And just like I said, they're focused on improving those operational efficiencies, which was a theme that came to light over the course of the year. So absolutely audit your paid media performance, reallocate spends ideally toward intent-driven campaigns. And I have something on here that says stop buying awareness, earn it. Right now, you don't want to necessarily ignore things like programmatic, the Google Display Network, right? There's still a time and place for those. But ultimately, if paid media doesn't have an acceptable ROAS, ideally well beyond your margin targets, you're leaving, really that money can be better spent elsewhere for higher returns, right? Again, this comes back to the theme of operational efficiency rather than volume. This is one of my favorite quotes in the world of marketing. I think it was an old Macy's exec who said this: half the money I spend on advertising is wasted. The trouble is I don't know which half. This is still our reality. The analytics and attribution, as much as you would think, modern companies, large enterprise level companies doing billions of dollars in revenue have this figured out, we can tell you firsthand they don't. Getting that single source of truth is so critical. We even had a conversation with a client a few weeks ago who recently resigned from OuterBox. And when we said, hey, we look at Google Analytics and we say, you had $30 million in year-over-year growth from organic revenue. It's amazing. They come back to us, they say, well, analytics isn't our source of truth, right? The attribution's wrong. And they say, okay, let's look at Adobe Analytics, where we said that's our source of truth. You look at that, it tells a bit of a different story. Take it to them. Well, that's not our source of truth either. So what is the source of truth, right? So strengthening analytics and attribution allows for your ability to be more surgical within your paid media spend, to be more intentional with the queries you're going after for SEO optimization when you go for those high intent queries. You absolutely need to understand the buyer journey, right? So you have first touch, last touch attribution. That's great. Most people focus on last touch still, which is amazing to me in this day and age. So you have first touch, last touch. That's bare minimum, right? So ideally at this point, you are looking at the entire buyer journey, whether that's through GA4, whether that's through first-party data. We have our own proprietary tool that we use to understand the entire customer journey and lead gen environments. And then ideally, you have prompt tracking in place. If you don't have prompt tracking in place yet, it's a major missed opportunity. You're not necessarily behind the 8 ball, but go ahead and get it. We use LLM for our purposes, and we do prompt tracking across our entire client base. So strongly recommend that as well. But ultimately, like, this probably could have been the first slide from in the action framework, because without proper analytics and attribution, how do you know where to invest? How do you know where to grow, right? We want to know which half of our money is wasted so we can improve our efficiency in our investments. And then big thing here, and this is also probably could have been the first slide, but adopting AI pragmatically. Now, given the slow adoption within organizations, within B2B environments, this is not something you necessarily need to like rush to do tomorrow. Map out what that looks like. And when I use the word pragmatically very intentionally, right? Don't just do AI for AI's sake, right? Don't just start, trying to drum up a new website in lovable.dev or write code with Claude for no reason. Good to experiment on your own time, but from a business perspective, be very intentional with how you're going to use this, because the time invested here potentially has compounding savings on the back end if it's done right. Right. So pilot one AI use case, whether that's with a company like OuterBox, a third party, or just internally with some of your early adopters you have on staff. You have them, find them, and pilot a use case. Right. So we look at AI from two different lenses. External, right? Of course, we're focused on LLM visibility. Right? Are we being surfaced in citations in ChatGPT and LLMs, or are we non-existent? Right. So that really comes down to structured content. Looking at prompt tracking, like I said, within tools like AccuLLM to focus on driving traffic and ideally driving business through LLMs. As of last summer, LLM search traffic grew to almost 8% of the combined market share by June 2025, which is wild, because if you think 3 years ago, it was 0. Right. So, I mean, Google didn't even grow that fast and take that much market share that fast. So they're competing with LexisNexis and Yahoo back in the day. And that was last summer. Imagine what the market penetration is today. And then internal, agentic AI, I mentioned that's not a buzzword. This is a very real thing now that should be adopted within internal work streams to improve efficiencies, improve margin, take mind-numbing tasks off your team's time and let them focus on strategy. Let them focus on where they can add the most value. Talk about improving operational efficiency. That's where you're going to get it, right? So with operational efficiency being the number one goal from our Market Pulse survey, that's how you do it. So the final thing here, obviously I presented all of our survey findings, actionable insights as a result, but I do want to parse it out a little bit more. Let's read between the lines, and I apologize for the text-heavy slide. Planning for growth does not equal investing in growth, right? So within our survey, they said 35% say they're planning for growth, but that doesn't mean they're spending money to grow, right? So I think that's a very key understanding of the survey results, right? So if you are planning for growth, typically you need to fund it, right? So you're looking at ideally, top of funnel, bottom of funnel, middle of funnel, middle funnel, bottom of funnel. If you're funding those efforts now, that's the stuff that pays off when the macro environment improves, right? When maybe the downward pricing pressure lifts. When you have economic downturns and you have businesses, they say the first thing they pull is marketing. That's the exact opposite response you want, as I think we all know on this call. You need to reinvest, if anything, double down in your investment in marketing during downward cycles. As much as CFOs and CEOs may argue the budget isn't there, find it, because what will happen is if you're buying the dip, when it rebounds, you get all the benefit, right? All your other competitors likely pulled marketing dollars at the time because they were not investing in growth, right? They may have been planning for it, hoping for it, but they didn't put money there because of the macroeconomic pressures. This is how you can differentiate yourself. And this is where we have seen across our 1,000 clients, across my 10 years of doing this at OuterBox, 20 years of our existence, the companies that are around tomorrow are the companies that do this during downward cycles. One thing that was interesting was that the buyer behavior data does contradict some of our survey sentiment. So we do think that, like, the global data showing in terms of, like I mentioned, how sales cycles are longer than ever. We're seeing that across our client base, across the industrial sector. However, when you look at globally, they compressed in 2025, which is interesting. So you had more POs on this side, you had more e-commerce transactions, you had shorter sales cycles. So because a lot of our respondents do skew more towards more complex buying cycles in the B2B manufacturing space, tariffs are much more directly impactful there before they trickle down to the rest of the economy. Take that with a grain of salt, right? Because unless you're having industrial, maybe that behavior data doesn't necessarily apply to you as a business. As I mentioned on the previous slide, AI readiness, that is we call it the silent competitive divide, right? So as much as we have almost 100% of buyers using LLMs to do research to facilitate information gathering, only 6% of our clients felt prepared. And we see this across the macro environment as well, as slow adoption in the B2B environment. Steepest gap, which means it's going to be your largest opportunity gap to close. So if you can get ahead of this as much as you can, start piloting some of those agentic workflows that I mentioned, that will absolutely give you a massive advantage long term by creating a solid structure that your competition is clearly not investing in right now. So last thing, operational efficiency, right priority with a catch, right? I always like to have a catch in our findings. You cannot ignore demand, right? So this is not saying pull back on your ad dollars, pull back on your SEO, on your growth initiatives and your growth hires. It's saying really look at them with more of a fine-tooth comb, right? So it's not that should not be invested, because you still need pipeline, you still need sales, you still need new business coming in, right? So as much as we focus primarily on efficiency, growth still has to come, right? I love the line that we put in here. It says efficiency and growth have to be simultaneous, not sequential. So you have to improve operational efficiency, ideally while you scale demand. But if you have to pick and choose where your attention goes, you probably need to hire someone to facilitate some of those growth metrics, some of those growth levers. All right. Well, that's what I had. I know we have some Q&A coming up. So I'll kick it back to you, Heather. We do have this kind of as if anybody's interested, I have my contact information here for folks that are maybe interested in learning more about how to improve operational efficiencies with agentic AI, capitalizing on opportunities within LLMs search, and then the being more surgical with paid media. I know it's a little ambiguous, so audits there as well. But anyway, back to you, Heather.
No, that was great stuff. And we do have some questions coming in, but I am just going to drop your email there just so they can copy paste it if they need it a little bit quicker. So let me publish this question by Andrew. All right. So first, and you just ended talking about this. So Jordan asks, do you think Google Ads is the best place to start testing ads? So just talking about the ad space.
I would argue yes, because you have volume there. So all your other ad platforms, it's not necessarily like when you have a Google ad, you're already capturing existing intent. When you go to social, you go to YouTube, you're really trying to create demand in that sense. You're getting people in an area where they're not necessarily expecting the ad or wanting the ad. When you service this up in Google Ads, you're going to get much more statistically significant data and actionable data within the Google Ads platform because of the intent behind it. So I would absolutely say test ads in Google Ads first. However, Meta and your other platforms shouldn't be far behind, right? And depending on the spend you're investing, of course, the more you invest, the faster turnaround you're going to get on your data, and the faster you're going to be able to action against it. Then you can leverage those findings in terms of how you go to market with your other channels.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. We actually had an article, and I'll look for it when Jeff is answering this next question, by Lisa Raichler on our site about talking about where to put your budget in paid ads. So I will drop that here. All right. Ulf has a question. Are there tools now to track the black box from the first outreach, sending the cold email to person A at the company until someone else from that company actually submits an RFQ? I mean, if we could see a full journey at attribution, do you know how happy all of us marketers and, our leaders would be? But any advice there, Jeff?
You're still a bit of a black box, of course, because this is very disparate, right? This is not one unified journey. What I will say is first-party data can solve for a lot of this with proprietary tools. Those can be kind of expensive. OuterBox has some that we sell, but that should bridge some of the gap. But ultimately, even us, where we struggle right now is how to measure brand visibility in terms of what tools, because there's 4 or 5 different tools that you really need to combine in order to accurately measure brand visibility across various segments. So within this, I would say it's going to be a combination of tools, right? Ideally, you have prompt tracking in place. Ideally, you have third-party tools in place. Of course, you have analytics as your baseline GA. But ultimately, it's the black box, I'll say, has not been unpacked yet. This is where you ideally have a full-time analytics person, or ideally you have those resources allocated internally. But it's definitely still something even OuterBox is solving for to a certain degree.
Yeah, I mean, we all are. Definitely not alone in that boat. All right. So Andrew's asking, given buyers are 83% through the research before contact, what are you seeing work best for companies trying to influence that pre-contact journey in an AI-driven discovery landscape?
Yeah, good question, Andrew. So it definitely, the battlefield for this right now is LLMs, of course, right? So really, when we are optimizing for LLMs, the reality is, and if you follow any SEO influencer online, as I'm sure all of you do, Chris Long, Lily Ray, et cetera, anybody who says they can measure LLM impact is probably not telling you the whole truth, right? You can measure it to a larger degree, but it is absolutely evolving. So us being able to influence citations, you're still getting record percentages of citations that are coming from websites that don't even rank on page one, which is still wild to me, where they don't necessarily have authority. Haven't necessarily been in the game as long as you have, but they're being cited within LLMs. So the unfortunate answer to this is it's a lot of high activity, broad strokes, where you have third-party listings, link building, like I mentioned, awards earlier. It's a lot of off-site effort that is going to allow you to appear more in these citations, more in this off-site, during this 83% research phase. So you can't, depending on budget and time, ideally you're everywhere at all times, right? But where we have found success, where a lot of our clients have found success, is more that off-site focus within traditional SEO tactics. Link building is still a very viable tactic to influence that search landscape. Whether that's building your own authority for inbound search or allowing LLMs to find you through citations, and that I think it's like 75% of LLM citations or authority is driven by offsite mentions, offsite metrics. So that has been a larger shift in the macro SEO geo environment, and I think still holds water today.
So I like this question from Laura, which is a good follow-up for this because, part of the AI discovery landscape has a lot to do with content, like you talked about, So Laura asks, how important are published articles, case studies, and the similar to being found in AI? Is there any impact on this type of content over standard web pages? So we're talking about listicles and things like that.
So I've hated this as a theme in 2025. When we, because OuterBox, we're very strong SEO shop. We've driven 90 to 95% of our business through organic search for 15 years until 2025. And then AI overviews started to diminish the importance of exactly what you're referencing here, Laura. Long form informational content, as much as it is still important, I will argue, and some people may debate me on this, has diminished in importance a little bit. Where we're focusing a lot of our client efforts and where we're seeing most of those returns is focusing on the commercial and transactional intent keywords, because that's what's driving the revenue. That's what's driving the growth, right? So when you look at standard web pages like a PDP, like a service page, like an industry page, if you can capture intent there, put a lot of focus there, that's where we're seeing the ROI with a lot of our client base. You still have to publish informational content. Unfortunately, Google's taken all the credit with their AI overviews. But topic clustering is still a thing, right? We still have to cater to that. That has not gone away in the evolution with the advent of LLMs. But in terms of business impact, it is not what it used to be.
Great. All right. So we got a couple more questions. These ones we grabbed prior to the event. So with operational efficiency being the number one priority, where do you see businesses making the biggest mistakes when trying to improve that efficiency?
Probably saw this first half of last year. And I can't speak to the enterprise level layoffs that have happened. When you see big headlines like Amazon or Microsoft laying off thousands of employees at a time, when operating primarily in the mid-market SMB, I see a lot of mistakes being made when they do layoffs to improve operational efficiencies, because they think that the cost savings, it's either going to force the existing team members to be more efficient with their time, or it's going to somehow just save them on margin and make them look good on paper. I saw this happen in the first half of last year quite a bit, and there's a couple of use cases I have in my head that, which I obviously can't say, where it did not pan out. Right? These are not situations where thinner headcount, lower headcount means efficiency. right? So starting with those efficiency gains through agentic AI development incorporated into your work streams is where you absolutely should start. And then ideally, you repositioning your existing employees, your existing team members to other areas where they can thrive in.
Excellent. All right, Jeff. Well, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them in. But I'm going to take this down. And one of the last things, just, we talked a lot about a few different tactics and everything today. And one of the themes that keeps coming up is lean teams, right? So when we're talking about lean teams, there's a lot to do. We can only do so much in a day. Where do you suggest people get started?
In terms of when you say like lean teams, like for the broader context of this, or sorry, could you specify a little bit?
Yeah. What's the one thing that they should be taking away from this framework? What's the one of the maybe most impactful places that they can put their attention, because we can't spread it across everything, right?
Yeah, to me, it's this first bullet, because when you look at the findings we had and the drastic flip we had year over year for the priorities that folks had heading into the new year, it used to be scaling sales and marketing. Now it's improving operational efficiency, and that runs right alongside the innovation happening within the AI space. So I would say finding ways to improve operational efficiency, if you do nothing else, leveraging AI, developing agents, working with a third party, shameless plug like OuterBox, to develop those agents. That is absolutely going to be, I think, where you're going to get a lot most bang for your buck. Again, don't ignore demand. Don't ignore filling that pipeline, right? That'll be the death knell of any company. But as business leaders, as business owners, absolutely look to improve operational efficiencies, as the cost savings you'll realize down the line. Just like investing in SEO for the first time, it is a compounding return on your investment, right? You may not realize it right away. Again, the example I gave earlier is that web assistant, the chatbot. You're not going to realize that cost savings immediately, but over time, as you reposition certain folks in other areas where they may be stronger, more strategic, ultimately that's where you're going to realize a lot of your gains. So keep in mind, just like SEO, somebody comes to you after starting an SEO campaign 3 months in, they say, "Why haven't I grown?" Well, you're 3 months in. You need to give it a little more time and continue to invest. Same thing with this. When you invest in agentic AI, when you invest in cost savings, time savings initiatives, don't expect it to pay out in the first 3 to 6 months. Right, so be patient with that. But absolutely, if you do nothing else, leaving this today, that is where your focus should be.
Perfect. That's great advice, Jeff. All right. Well, with that, we've gone through all the questions. We've got some great insights. So, Jeff, tell the people where to find you.
You can find me on LinkedIn. Find me here. This is my email address. If you are interested in learning anything more about running diagnostics, we do free audits for prospects all the time, or just for folks who are looking for a little help, a little guidance, being pointed in the right direction. So feel free to reach out on LinkedIn or via email, and we would be happy to connect.
Why does Chrome always run really slowly when I'm like, I just need this one thing quickly? All right. So here is Jeff's LinkedIn. With that, you can find me on LinkedIn as well. Follow us on Search Engine Journal. Find out what webinars we have coming up next. Jeff, always a pleasure having you and the OuterBox team here. So thanks for joining us today. We'll see everybody on the next SEJ webinar. Have a great one. Bye all. Thanks, Jeff.
Take care. Thank you.